Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on where on this earth you are. Today we are here with Franziska. Thank you, Franziska, for being here with us. Luisa is gonna host this event with me. So, Franziska is gonna be our lecturer today, and she's gonna share a little about her knowledge on Sargassum interests. Franziska was one of my colleagues in Island Innovation Ambassador program. She has a PhD in marine biology from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. Moreover, she specialized in coral reef research, especially the benthos. She has been studying about sargassum for 3 years, taking into account first how it affects seagrass beds, but then also looking at what type of products locals would like to make from them. Furthermore, she does research on how it could be used for carbon capture. Lu?
So, hello everyone, my name is Luisa, and I'm going to help with the communication between Franziska and those who are watching us. And finally, yet importantly, she has a podcast on Sargassum that is an amazing job of science divulgation. The link is going to be in the description of the video so you can access whatever you want. Franziska, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today. We very appreciate you have find some time in your busy schedule to share your knowledge with us. Thank you so very much. Such a pleasure. Well, at the end of the lecture, we're going to make some time for the questions to be answered, so you can write down your comments, your questions. Doesn't matter if in Portuguese or English. We're going to translate it for her. And if you just excuse me just for a little bit, I'm going to speak in Portuguese just to make it clear. Just a second. Olá, gente. Bom dia. Só para deixar claro que no final da palestra a gente vai abrir para comentários e para perguntas, então vocês podem escrever tanto em inglês quanto em português. A gente traduz, não se preocupem. E, bom, é isso. Boa palestra a todos. Franziska, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me. And as you said, I will talk a little bit about sargassum and what we found out by talking to lots and lots of people from different backgrounds about sargassum. I'm going to try to share my screen. Here we go. And then I move over to PowerPoint. There we go. So today I want to talk about if sargassum influx is actually a catastrophe or an opportunity. And there are 4 perspectives of sargassum as the University of Southampton has come up with. One is sargassum as an emerging threat, something that is bad. So other people look at sargassum as the rainforest of the sea. A third group of people look at sargassum as a lucrative resource. And the fourth group of people look at sargassum as climate change mitigation through carbon sequestration. So in the chat or just by yourself, think about what do you actually think about sargassum? Which one of these, maybe multiple, is your view on it? And maybe after hearing my talk, you will change your view or have multiple views afterwards.
Hey, brother, hear me now. Brother, dog. Know me, understand.
Sargassum to me, something to look at.
Something that I can see from space.
It's an amazingly diverse and really important and unique habitat.
Providing a hunting ground for those big fish.
My goal is to find an oceanic white-tip shark, a hammerhead shark, something like that.
The baby sea turtle go to the Sargasso Sea.
Cette mystérieuse mer des Sargasses.
que je n'ai jamais vues.
Once it gets to the shore and gets to the beach, it becomes a huge problem.
Because they fill up bays where there's no oxygen in the water anymore and everything there is just dying.
Et ces sargasses peuvent donc se retrouver contaminés en chlordécone.
H2S, l'ammoniac et l'arsenic inorganique. Et ces produits sont toxiques pour ceux qui sont dans les zones d'impact.
For resort properties, obviously, besides the image impact, the guest experience impact, the smell, there's the cost.
And it's a sign of disrupted ocean ecosystem.
Telling us, I've been proliferating because of you, now do something about it.
So we do have the Citizen Science Project ready. Anyone can use it.
Satellites to detect the presence and the position on Sargassum on a daily basis.
En 4 etapas: la contención, recolección, disposición y la industrialización.
Todos nuestros productos son hechos 100% de sargasso.
Le côté inifuge ou le côté résistance à l'eau naturel, je parle naturel.
We can extract and we can refine seaweed by minimizing, if not outright avoiding in some cases, turning that biomass back into CO2.
Whether we can turn this golden tide into a golden opportunity.
You know, cultivating these seaweeds as gardens, as new kinds of gardens in the ocean, is going to provide a whole new era in human civilization.
So now with this little clip, I wanted to show you the different views that our podcast guests have about it. And together they kind of gave you a really short overview about Sargassum. But I want to dive a little bit deeper so you really understand what it is all about. So in this little video, you can see the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt that started in July 2021. And every summer, you see that there's a lot of sargassum coming into the Caribbean and all the way to Africa. And you could see that the biggest year so far was 2018, as you can see here. And the belt went all the way from Africa to the Gulf of Mexico. And at that point, there was 20 million tons of sargassum or more in the waters. So what is sargassum? Here you can see a picture, and the sargassum I'm talking about today are just 2 species out of the 300 plus that there are of sargassum. And they're the 2 species who are never attached to the ground, but they're free floating and using these little bubbles you see to float on the surface of the ocean. Naturally, the sargassum is found in the Sargasso Sea, which is the only sea without a land border. It is bordered by currents that are all going into the sea, so it makes a natural barrier for the sargassum to stay in that area. And one of the places you know maybe in that area is Bermuda. So this is where sargassum is found naturally, and even Columbus has found it when he was traveling to America. In there, sargassum is the rainforest of the sea, as people call it. There's a lot of fish and animals who are using the sargassum as a living place or as a hunting ground. And even people love to fish there for big game fish who are attracted by smaller animals. Really important is that the little baby sea turtles are using the Sargasso Sea to grow and to live in those years that they are out at open sea. So it's a really important habitat for them, both to eat, but also to rest and to float with the sargassum. And as you can see in the other pictures, there's some really, really cool animals like the seahorse who are living only in the Sargasso Sea. Another really cool animal, there is the Sargasso fish. So this is a type of frogfish that you find in the Sargasso Sea. And I was lucky enough to see a few of them this year when I was living in Mexico, when the sargassum was coming close to shore. And they're definitely really, really cool. So what happened? Why do we have now sargassum in the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt? In 2009, 2010, in winter, there was a very extreme North Atlantic oscillation, which meant that there was very weak currents in the North Atlantic, actually the weakest ever recorded for several months. And then the winds and the surface currents were able to move the sargassum to the northern part of Africa. As you can see, a little orange spot there. And from there, the normal currents brought it down to the equator. By the equator, the sargassum could flourish. So in the equator region, there is upwelling. So there's a lot of nutrients that help the sargassum. There's lots of light, and that really helps the sargassum to grow. And then when it is moved towards the Caribbean and towards Africa, you have the Amazon River, the Orinoco River, the Congo River, who all are adding nutrients as well, so it can bloom even more and become even bigger before it reaches the different beaches. So since then, since 2011, we have that patch down in the equator, and every year it blooms and goes to the different beaches. So now sargassum can also look like this. This is a picture from Mexico, that you just have tons and tons of it on the beaches, and people have to rake it and take it apart with machineries as well. And this picture was taken before COVID. So she is not wearing a mask because of COVID, but because of the really bad gases and smells that come from the sargassum. So as soon as the sargassum reaches the shore, it starts decomposing. And about 2 days after it reaches the shore, it starts emitting toxic gases such as hydrogen sulfide that are very bad for people's health. In places like the French Caribbean, houses are built very close to shore in bays, and the sargassum accumulates there, and there's months of gases being at the level that is toxic in people's houses. So this is a real big problem. But there's also other problems. So when the sargassum accumulates in a bay, it can lead to no oxygen being available in the bay, and any animals that live in the bay and haven't been able to go out actually die. I have seen seagrass beds that died because of sargassum, and so have other people, and the same goes for mangroves and coral reefs. And the second picture here is about tourism. So no tourist wants to spend money to be on a beach full of stinking seaweed that turns the water brown. So there's a huge loss of tourism if sargassum arrives, and hotels have to decide to either remove it for a lot of money or not have tourists around. Another very interesting thing is with the gases that got released, electronic devices also corrode much faster. So people have to replace their fridges, their air conditioning, etc. much more quickly if they live close to shore. So there's a lot of different negative impacts of sargassum if it arrives in large amounts on the beach. Luckily, we also have some solutions. We figured out that we can see sargassum from space and track sargassum maps. So you can see here on the pictures, the green and red are actually where the sargassum is, and people have come up with ways to model, make a forecast, kind of like a weather forecast of when the sargassum is about to hit. It's not perfect because we also have a lot of cloud cover, and then you cannot see the sargassum from space, but it's getting better and better. So once you know the sargassum is coming, you can prepare for removing it. If there's not much, you can do it by hand or with a surf raker, which are the two pictures at the bottom. But then if you have lots of it, you may have to bring in really big machineries, which is not ideal because it also has negative effects on your beach. A really good method is to put a boom out in front of your beach and actually collect it with a boat, like you can see on top. This is only possible if there's not too many waves. but it makes it possible that you don't have to do the collection on the beach. And also the sargassum you collect doesn't have sand in it. So it's a win-win situation, and it's the preferred way of collecting it if possible. Then after collection, the sargassum often just gets dumped somewhere and left to stay there. There's not many places that are products made out of it. And this can also be problematic because it can decompose there, and it can leach arsenic and heavy metals and nutrients into the groundwater, and actually lead to problems in the groundwater aquifers. So you have to be very careful where you're going to put the sargassum. And ideally, you want to make products out of it so you don't dump it, because sargassum as an algae is actually really, really awesome. So some of the people you heard in the talk, in the little clip, told about the products they're making. So there's people who make paper out of it, and they actually say, hey, it's water resistant, it's fire resistant. There's lots of companies who make fertilizers out of it, or also biostimulants to help the plants grow as fast as the sargassum is growing. There's composting going on. There's a company that makes recyclable plates out of it, so single-use plates out of sargassum and yucca. There's a guy in Mexico who built an entire house out of clay and sargassum, and a company that makes shoes out of plastic and sargassum. And the soap they're making in Mexico is amazing. It's one of my favorite soaps to use. It really has very good qualities to make your skin soft and not itchy. FAO in Barbados has made a really, really good report on the sargassum uses. And it tells people what is known about the different uses. And it also they made this really cool graphic of how much of which product you can make out of a ton of sargassum. So you can either feed 99 sheep, or make over 40,000 soap bars, or over 2,000 shoes. You can grow 114 kilos of mushrooms. You can make fuicondant, which is a natural kind of a medicine, 10 kilos of it if you want. There's lots and lots you can make out of it with 1 ton of sargassum. So a few products I want to tell you a bit more about, especially thinking about Brazil and what could be useful in Brazil. Barbados, which is a almost close neighbor to you, they figured out how to use the wastewater of rum distilleries and sargassum to make biofuel, a biogas. And it's really easy to convert cars to use this biogas. And since they have a gas grid in Barbados, they think this could be the next fuel for Barbados. So they want to be fossil fuel free by 2030. And they calculated that if they use all the sargassum in their economic zone, in the economic water zone, and 80% of the wastewater on the island, that they can fuel all their cars with this sargassum biofuel, which I think is really, really cool. Since Brazil is doing a lot of agriculture and a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus are being added to the ocean through the Amazon River, one really cool product for Brazil would be to make fertilizers and biostimulants and bring that nitrogen and phosphorus back to land. So making it a circular process, which means that no new nitrogen and phosphorus have to be added. And therefore, the amount of nitrogen phosphorus added to the ocean will stay stable rather than increasing. So this would be really, really cool. And actually, the sargassum is growing partly because of the water coming from the Amazon. So it would just make sense to bring that back and use it again on the fields. We also talked to a group from Australia that did an analysis. So they on paper figured out that if you take a big tanker and you change it so it can harvest the sargassum at sea and actually process it at sea to make bio-crude oil. So they figured out a process that you can harvest at sea and make bio-crude oil at sea. And they said this would be really useful for countries and companies that have refineries on land, which Brazil has. And they are currently looking for partners so they can purchase one of these boats and try this out, which costs, I think, $40 or $44 million, which for us, of course, it's a lot of money. But if you think about a government or a refinery company or some type of oil company, this is like almost no money for them. And the study they did, they actually found that the crude oil made from sargassum has a really good profit margin with the current oil price. So it's not something that it should be profitable against oil. So it should be something that refineries and oil companies are actually interested in figuring out if they can use it. So one important part is that you want to have the fresh sargassum to make products. You don't want this sludgy, decomposed stuff you see on the left side. And to do this, there's this really cool company that came up that doesn't have a conveyor belt, but that has 2 loops that you can put onto a fishing boat. So they are working in the Dominican Republic, but they want to expand in other places. And in 5 minutes, you can turn a fishing boat into a sargassum collection boat. And this is really useful because it makes the cost of collecting sargassum at sea a lot less. It's a lot easier to make this change and a lot less money. And it also makes it easier to get the sargassum collection boat in a few weeks rather than a few months. And the fishermen get an extra job. And if you don't have any sargassum, you can change the boat back to being a fishing boat. So I think this is a really interesting new concept that maybe could be used also in Brazil and other places. Lastly, I want to talk to you about carbon sequestration of sargassum, which is one of the research topics I'm working on right now. Since the industrializations, humans have added 1,500 gigatons of carbon to the atmosphere. The CO2 levels were about 280 ppms before. Now we are at 220 ppms, and the safe level for us to live is 350. So it's clear that we have to not only cut our emissions, but also take carbon out of the atmosphere to get back to safe levels or even to pre-industrial levels. And to do that, we have to sequester carbon. And one way to do that is through nature. So you probably heard about planting trees to sequester carbon. If you're into ocean, you may have heard about seagrasses, mangroves, and salt marshes. But macroalgae can actually do the same. And you can see on the right that sargassum does sink naturally to the deep ocean and is already a carbon pump. And that by collecting it and sinking it at a bigger rate, we can increase this carbon pump and get CO2 out of the atmosphere. There still needs to be a lot of research done on this before we can start this at large scale. Especially we have to research what it does to the deep sea if we start doing this at a faster rate as to not cause problems. But it's one of those things that could really make a big difference and capture gigatons of carbon in this decade, maybe even. And sargassum just has superpowers when it's out at sea. You don't need any fresh water to grow it. You can grow it literally almost in the entire ocean, maybe not at the poles because it's a bit too cold. If you think about trees, they could be be impacted by fires, but sargassum doesn't burn out in the ocean. I've never seen that. It grows super fast, so in less than 2 weeks, if it has the right nutrients, it doubles in size. And it actually increases the albedo of the ocean, so it helps us against the warming of the ocean. And you can store it at the deep sea for hundreds of years. So sargassum, if it doesn't come to the shore, it's actually really, really awesome and a really, really cool thing that can help us with so many things. So now I want you to look at the different perspectives again and think about if you change your perspective or if you added one to your thinking. I definitely, as a person, I started off with thinking sargassum mostly as a threat. And then people told me, then I read about how out at sea it's a rainforest. And I thought that was really cool. And then later on, people told me about the resource and the climate change mitigation. And I got really excited about this. And me personally, I hold all 4 perspectives in my brain all together at the same time. And some days when I can't go to the beach and it's all brown, I may be more thinking about sargassum as a problem. And other days when I see a really cool new product, I see it more as a resource. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions. If you want to listen to our podcast, it is on Spotify, it's on YouTube. Just put in Sargassum Podcast. You can go to our website, marinefrontiers.org/sargassum, and you find it there too. And I would like to thank Seafields and the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center for helping us financially with the podcast and making it possible for us to produce it.
So thank you, Franziska. I think we can start with the questions now. There's none in the chat, but we prepared some. So can you hear me well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do you want to start, please?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. I'm really sorry for the question because I'm not this kind of field.
She's an artist.
Yeah, I'm
always an artist
too. So I'm really sorry, but I got curious. Which is the most effective way to collect the sargassum? Because I see people do it on hand, but also in boats with big nets. So which is the most effective way to catch?
Yeah, so it depends a bit on your location, so where you are. So if the sea is rather flat, then putting out a barrier and using a boat. If you have the money to buy the barrier and the boat, which is sometimes a problem as well, that's the most effective, because then you have very little negative effects. Like you never have the tourists or the locals who have to see the sargassum, or very little. And you also don't have sand in the sargassum. So if you want to make products, you have a better feedstock to make them. But if you don't have the money for the boats and the barrier and it comes to shore, then it's best, if possible, to do it by hand, because that has the least impact on your beach. It takes the least sand away, it compacts the least. But often when they do it by hand, they have like a little tractor helping them, putting it, away from the beach. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways. And then of course, if for some reason a lot of sargassum comes in, or you haven't been able to clean it up for a few days, you may have a lot of it, and then some people have to take big machineries, unfortunately, and there's no other way around.
I get it. Thank you.
So the next one is mine. And I want to know if what differs sargassum from the other kinds of algae? What makes it special? Is it possible to do the same things that you pointed out that it's possible to make with sargassum with other kinds of algae?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the sargassum I talked about in the presentation is just 2 species of sargassum. So there's a lot of other sargassum species as well that are attached to the seafloor. So the big difference between these two and other macroalgae is that they're never attached to the seafloor, which means they don't have to be close to shore to grow. Like if you want to grow kelp, you have to be close to shore, or you have to make a mechanism for the kelp not to sink. But sargassum has its own little bubbles, so it doesn't sink, which makes it that it can take up all the space that the small planktons can take up, the phytoplankton. But compared to phytoplankton, it incorporates a lot more carbon to in its body compared to the nutrients it needs, and it also sinks a lot faster. So it's a way better carbon sink. So it is a bit like the best of the two worlds. It can live where the plankton is, but it has the really good qualities of the macroalgae. And all you need to figure out is how to burst those bubbles and sink it and of course, make an impact assessment of the deep sea to see what's happening. But there are people working on using other algae for carbon sequestration as well. So it's not the only algae that can do that.
I was muted. Thank you, Franziska. Lu, can you read the next question, please?
There is a question right here.
Yeah.
Which role the sargassum plays in the maintenance of the aquatic system?
That's a really good question. So the sargassum in the Sargasso Sea is actually a protected environment because it plays such an important role. One important role is for the little baby sea turtles who are finding a sargassum patch and then actively going with the patch to the Sargasso Sea and live there for several years and to grow bigger before they come back to the islands and the shores and to live on the reef and in the seagrass beds. So that's really, really important for them. Of course, we also have them in the Pacific where there's no sargassum. So they are able to do this without the sargassum, but the sargassum really helps them. And then you just have, you have some species that are only found in the sargassum. So if we got rid of the sargassum, we would lose those species as well. And otherwise, whenever you have something floating on the top of the ocean, it is a place where animals aggregate, where fish aggregate, and then small fish get there, and then bigger fish get there. And the sargassum therefore becomes a really important habitat and just increases how much fish and food we have in the ocean. So it's really, really important to have it around. And out in the open ocean, it's a wonderful ecosystem. It's just when it comes to the beach that we have a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I saw like a fish, I think. There is kind of look like the sargassum. So the sargassum is also changing the appearance and the way of living of the animals. Right?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes. The fishes and the crabs and the seahorses that live in the sargassum, they are all kind of camouflaged. So it's actually really hard to see them. Like they look the same, they have the same colors, the same shapes. So that just shows that they are specialized for this type of environment.
Yeah, so the laws of sargassum would interfere in the whole ecosystem. Yeah, we have another question. microalgae is capable of playing the same role as macroalgae in curbing global warming. I don't know if curbing is the right word, but I think it is.
So my colleagues are the experts in this, and they first were looking into plankton, so microalgae, to help with global warming and with carbon drawdown. And they just found out that it's really hard because they not all of it will get to the deep sea. A lot of it will be reused before it gets to the deep sea. And it's also difficult to do the accounting and figure out how much you are actually drawing down, which is kind of important if you want to get paid for it and you want to pay people to do the work. And the macroalgae, they bring in more carbon into their body than the plankton, so that's already good. They need less nutrients to make the same amount of carbon. And then they sink a lot faster, so pretty much 100% of what you're sinking actually arrives at the deep sea. So that's why macroalgae seems to be better, but microalgae can definitely also play a role and is already playing a really big role in the natural carbon cycle. So a lot of the carbon that ends up at the deep sea naturally is microalgae already. But in order to work on climate change and find solutions, we have to make it go faster and sink additional amounts of carbon to the deep sea.
Okay, actually I have another one. I saw that the sargassum is used for a lot of things other than its purpose. So which purpose the scientists are using this sargassum? For which purpose?
Yeah, for what? Oh, there's so many. So there's a lot of different companies that have come up with things you can use the sargassum. So some people are scientists, some people are just regular people who've been walking on the beach and seen the sargassum, like, oh, we should make something out of this, or who've been waiting for somebody else to do something, and then they realize after 2 years nobody is doing something, so they start experimenting with it. And really successful is to make fertilizers out of it. That seems to be that's done in a lot of places. Cosmetica like soaps and face cosmetica is being done. Then there's people adding it with clay or with concrete to make building materials, which helps because we have a lot of sargassum, and how many soaps can you make? But concrete, you can make a lot more out of it, of course, or if you make clay bricks and buildings. So there is a lot of solutions, and a lot of them you can also combine together. And one company called C Combinator, who is in Puerto Rico and Mexico, they are looking into making bioplastics and bio-leather. So they're really looking into what all can we take out of the sargassum and make lots of different products out of the same amount of sargassum in like a refinery type way. So yeah, there's just so many products, and every time, like every few months, I see a new one. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about doing this, but this looks really good. So people are really creative, and it's an innovative space because it's a new problem. It's only 10 years old, and it took us a few years to realize the sargassum is probably here to stay. So there's still a lot of innovation going on, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I'm thinking in the art field. It's a blank page. There are many possibilities. You can even imagine use sargassum as a material for clothes, or so many.
Yeah,
So many.
People also make color from it. So they make a specific dye and coral color that you can use either to dye clothes or to make art with it too. So yeah, it's endless.
Changing not completely the subject. I saw some few days ago a woman that works with architecture, so it would fit perfectly in this field for building things from this algae. Thank you, Franziska. Is there any more questions? I don't think so.
Let me check.
No, I don't think so. Thank you one more. Do you wanna have a last word?
I think I said everything. Thank you again for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to give a talk.
Thank you for being for share your knowledge and make time for being here with us. It was incredible. I learned a lot, and I think everyone here has appreciated all the expertise you shared with us as well. Thank you one more time.
Thank you.
Lu, say your last words.
Well, I'm very excited now that I'm thinking about all you say. I very appreciate, because I'm not I didn't have much knowledge of this matter, but now I'm very excited. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity that Isa gave me to co-host with her. So thanks, Isa, and thank you so much, Franziska. I love it, all of it.
It was incredible. So bye, everyone.
Bye.
Till next time.